So let me continue by thanking Luc for arranging this conference. You know, it's always great to be here, and actually this year the IT guy came, you know, sound guy came, hello again, and so forth. You know, it's got getting personal with the IT folks and sound guys you will hear too often, right? It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to see this, you know, passion for the NAV product. We love it ourselves. As long as Luc is gonna make this conference, you know, we are gonna be here and do the show, so to speak. So.
Yeah, it's good to be back in Antwerp, and we have a lot of stuff to show you. So I think we'll, you know, jump right into it. Go ahead, Thomas.
Thank you. So today's show is going to be about one product with basically two names: NAV 2018, and the new name which we are going to introduce. We are going to rebrand the product from NAV 2018. The next product, or the next generation of the product, will be named Dynamics 365 and then codenamed Tenerife. We don't have the final product name yet, so we call it Tenerife at this point. But it's important to understand it is the same product, and it's a natural evolvement of Dynamics NAV 2018. Now, that leaves a problem here, right? Because the NAV TechDays next year, I don't know what the name's going to be. And then Luc did all these nice letters here. So, but Vincent already solved it. You know, via SAW, you can cut off the NAV and then use TechDays. I don't know. Well, we'll figure it out. But there's a challenge there, and we'll see where we end up next year with this. Now, normally there's a lot of slides, and somebody told me at some point, for those who need to leave early, get the key message in first. So that's exactly what we're going to do. When can you get it? So here's the roadmap, right? So we start with that. That's normally marketing folks always end with this one, right? But we start with it because then that's taken care of and we can get to the tech stuff, right? So this December 1st, we are going to ship NAV 2018, the continuation of NAV 2017, which is going to be the on-prem product. In the spring of 2018, we're going to do an R2 of NAV 2018, but then we're going to introduce the cloud half of the Dynamics 365 Tenerife. And then in the fall, the on-prem version of the Tenerife product will join in. And the reason we are doing this is we want to have one code base, one product, one code line, no differences. And we will achieve that at the fall of 2018 with Dynamics 365 Tenerife. So there's no difference here. It's still the same product we all love and all know. It's a continuation. It's a rebranding that's happening in over 2 releases. So at fall, we'll all be on Dynamics 365 Tenerife, no matter whether you do the on-prem version or whether you do the cloud version. Now, coming from that, let's look into when this is coming and the countries it's coming in. So as I said before, availability December 1st for the NAV 2018. And the Tenerife version, Dynamics 365 Tenerife, will be available in these 14 countries, as well as the W1 version that's also be available. And then people start asking, what about Norway? What about other countries? This is not the complete list of countries. This is the countries we're going to do in spring of 2018. More countries will, of course, follow after that. And then I would like to cover the ecosystem of this entire thing, Dynamics 365 Tenerife, and the journey we took. This is not necessarily a technical section, but I think it's very important to understand where we are going and why we are doing all this. And this is something that really enlightens my passion for this product, because suddenly you get to realize that the NAV product, and this is the last time I can talk about the NAV product. Talking about NAV, I've done that for many years now. It's going to be very hard not to say NAV in every other sentence, but I'll probably have a year to learn it now. So if we start by looking at what we have today. Moving to the cloud, we started out with Project Madeira, which then became Dynamics 365 for Financials, which was a scaled-down version of our beloved product, supporting only a limited set of functionality. What we're doing with the Tenerife product is we're bringing the full NAV into the cloud. So it's going to look something like this, where you have the full product in there. As you can see, this product, of course, communicates with the Office 365 family of products. There has interaction. There's a lot of communication between Office and Dynamics 365. Vincent will talk about integration later in the keynote here. Also, you can do the apps on top through use of the extensions. There's both the vertical app, the embedded apps, and then there's the standalone apps like, for instance, a PayPal app or other apps that by themselves just attribute additional functionality on top of the product itself. And all those apps, of course, ends up coming on App Store. In the entire Power family here, you can do Power. You can do Power Apps, you can do Power BI, you can use the Business API, which will also be covered later in the keynote. You can interact together with the product. And also, shortly, this thing will be released, which is the Business Suite of the Office family, where there's a lot of product that interacts again in there, and the invoicing app, which is the bottom one here, is actually running on top of the NAV infrastructure, using NAV as the platform there. Furthermore, on the other hand, on the other right side here, we're introducing a new product called the Accountant Hub, which essentially is a product that allows you to aggregate a lot of installations of Dynamics 365. It will go in and peek and get key values, key figures out. What are the revenue, what are the notifications, what do I need to care about for my clients if I'm an accountant and so forth. But we also realize there's probably other usabilities for such a product of aggregating multiple customers into one view. It could be the CEO of a big company wanting to see all the different branch offices, how they're doing, or functionalities or scenarios like that. And in there is a new family of things that can be sold and offered. Obviously, accounting services is one of them. You could actually, if you're using the Accountant Hub, you could have an app that didn't really add anything to the product itself, but added helplines or added templates or added other stuff in there. And we actually have the first examples of people doing such products with great success. And furthermore, there's a ton of things you can sell out there of services, adding again to the product. And if we look at the full picture here, when I started many years ago, there was just NAV, and NAV was the product. And if you see what we have here, it's kind of becoming a full ecosystem of a ton of things that's working together. What really, fascinates me about the thing is the uptake of other technology, both from Microsoft, but also third-party technology that we're using now to just make this product so much more great, both from a technology and also, a marketing and sales standpoint. It's really fantastic to see that journey and be part of it. Underneath all this, you'll see the Common Data Service, or the CDS. And this is going to be a phenomenal thing. And I'm saying this is going to be. We haven't seen the uptake of this yet, but don't be mistaken about the plans and the involvement from Microsoft in making CDS a success. Is definitely going to happen. And the interesting thing here is, of course, what is a CDS? And I want to spend a little bit or time thinking about, CDS here. So CDS is the Common Data Service. Last year at Tech Days, we had a section called the Data Strategy. And I'm going to repeat a little bit here because it's important to try to understand what CDS is and why that's going to be so important for the entire family around this product moving forward. So the data strategy at that point, and that still true, is a matter of being able, first of all, to have multiple applications talking together. So you need a common protocol. We got that with OData. We got that with the REST APIs. We had discoverability of finding the other services. We got that through Microsoft Graph. We need a possibility of doing apps that can aggregate data from different sources. That is Power Apps and Power Flow. And actually, there's a session on this on Friday at 9 o'clock, hosted by Mike Rommel and Michael Nielsen. I definitely recommend you go see that to understand more about CDS and CDM. And the list kind of stopped there last year, but this time we want to add additional things to this list, which is something that is going to hit us in a pleasant way, I would say. And that's the artificial intelligence, machine learning, insights, and cognitive services. This is going to change the world, guys. We only seen the tip of the iceberg at this point, but you know, when I talk to my kids, what are you going to study? They're teenagers, all of them, and it's like, you got to get into this. This is something where I have no idea where this is going eventually. So definitely there's potential in there. And looking at this, what is machine learning, by the way? So let's do one slide on machine learning, the definition. And I don't expect you to read this. You're welcome to do it if you're a fast reader. You can do it while I'm talking, by the way. But if I'm picking out the things that we need to understand from this, it's find the hidden insights. And by that I mean, if a machine learning can take some data and look at it and tell you something of that data, even though you know the data and can see the data, but it can tell you something, a correlation in that data you didn't see yourself, at that point it becomes valuable. And that is what this is all about. And let's give you an example of this. A common scenario would be if you had in your product, you want to know whether a person is a fraud before you do business with him. That's not an uncommon scenario. So the question here is whether Ferdinand is a fraud or not. And the only thing we have to go from this very simple example is his name and how much he's want to purchase. And then we have some historic data here. We know, of course, whether the former customers ended up paying their due bills and so forth. So we want to apply machine learning to such a thing. And the first thing we do is we separate the historic data into two groups, namely the training data and the validation data. And having removed some of the data, we don't show this to the machine learning engine, we only show the training data. And then we have the machine learning now look at this data here and try to make correlation, find patterns essentially between the rows here. And quickly it will come up with two patterns, it figured out, saying everybody's a fraud if they buy more than what is it, $2,600.45, then you're a fraud. Okay, that would fit the training data. It could also be that you're a fraud if your first letter is a P in your name, then you're also a fraud. So the machine learning, in this case, suggests two different models, so to speak. In the real world, it would suggest millions. That's what a computer is good at. It would try out millions of patterns, all matching the training data. And then eventually you reveal to the computer the missing info of the validation data to pick the model that actually had the best hit. That's it. There's no magic to this. This is the core of predictions and correlations in machine learning. But the biggest thing here is that computers can take broad data sets and do millions of combo and find these hidden correlations and thereby providing you an insight you couldn't see yourself. To give an example, let's just broaden this data set a little bit and you come up with such a thing here. Now as a human, which one is fraud here? What's the pattern? That's kind of hard. You can't really see it. It'll take you a little time. And add the 130 columns we have on sales order lines on the Dynamics 365 data set. Now it's impossible for humans to do this accurately. But that's exactly what machine learning is all about. And let me give you the hint here, of course. I know somebody saw it instantly that you are fraud if your age is this and you have the credit card from US, use it in Russia, and blah, 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 so forth. That was not easy to see. Now, moving forward with this, we actually have a demo here. So let me just move to this screen over here. It fell asleep. Hold on a second. Yeah, please swap the screen. All right, so the predictions of what's going to happen in the future based on historic data is something we already have built into our product today. Not sure you're actually aware of that, but if you go to the items, we have it several places. Item is just one of the places. And scroll down on a given items to the item forecast. This forecast here is actually based on both the data you have in your order book moving forward, but also the historic data. So looking back, what did I sell at the same time last year? How much did people order? And you can start adding in how was the weather that day? Do people buy more ice creams when it's a hot sunny day and so forth? All that is possible to get added in. And it's actually in the product today. You can go to the action and actually update the sales forecast. If you do that, what the product does is aggregating all the data and sending that into the Azure Cloud to the machine learning services. And the result will then come back and update the graph you can see here. And there's an updated successfully. I don't know whether it's updated now, but you get the general idea here. So if we look at the code, have to be a little bit technical here. It's actually not that a lot of code that's in here. This is a code snippet from code unit 1850, which is an extension that we put onto the base application. Everybody has it. And you can see what the code here, without walking through it in details, basically pick up the data and send this to Azure Machine Learning and end up calling this a time series management.forecast method. Time series management, it's a helper code unit we put in there that has a method that allows us to communicate with the Azure ML services and thereby do this prediction and show the graph moving forward. This is going to be phenomenal when you apply this across all our data. So if we look at the machine learning, the other thing that is really important here is, of course, the big data. So finding hidden insights and then get a data set to do it on. As you can probably see, the more data you get, the more data, the more columns you have to correlate, the more interesting insight you can actually get out of this. Power BI has a fantastic feature where they can take any data set and then you can feed it to machine learning. It doesn't need to know anything about column types or whatever it is. It will automatically go look and say, this looked like dates, this looked like numbers, this looked like zip codes, or this looked like whatever. And when you do that, you end up getting insights out of basically nothing, which is extremely interesting. I saw a demo where you feed it some vacation data, and obviously it came up with correlation saying there seems to be a correlation between the number of days spent on vacation and the amount of money used. Duh, right? I could have done that as a human. But if you dig into the further depth of the insights it comes up with in prediction, suddenly you see things you wouldn't have realized yourself. And you can go verify it, present graphs and stuff. It's really, really cool. Now, the entire thing here is without human intervention. So everything here, of course, needs to be automated, which is also part of the game. If we move forward and look at the Azure Cloud in general, these are the services running in the Azure Cloud. In the upper left corner, you'll find the virtual machines. That was what kind of started all of it. So you have Azure Cloud, your virtual machines. But now you have all these services running in there. And the one we've been talking about right now is this one, machine learning. But there's a ton of them in there. And this list next year will be twice as big. Well, maybe not twice as big, but it'll be bigger. New services are added, every day almost. And it's very interesting what's coming up there. Another one, of course, is the cognitive services just next to machine learning. And we also have that in our product. Let me move over here again. So what I'm doing now, I'm going to go to contacts. And inside the contact list, we built a new feature. So you can actually do image recognition, which is a cognitive service out of, again, the cloud. And let me just demo that. Go to one of the folks here, all kind. And you see there's a contact picture here. If we go to the bottom, you'll see there's a profile questionnaire. I don't know if you're familiar with the questionnaire feature, but basically you can add in all kinds of tags and extra info in there. And the way we built this is we send his picture to the Azure Cloud. It comes back with info of his predicted age and his gender, which is interesting. So what you do it, you go to Actions and Analyze Picture. And by doing that, we sent the picture, and you see instantly came back and say 54 and a male. I don't know if it's accurate. I don't know the guy's probably a commercial photo we picked up somewhere, but it looks right. At least I can see he's a male from what my judgment. Whether it's 54, I don't know. But this service is also available to you. You can actually take your holiday pictures and upload. You can do training data in the Azure Cloud today, showing it 10 pictures of your wife, and then upload the entire thing, and now you can just give me all the pictures of my wife and put them in a very special bucket. Anyways. So, imagine the following, just thinking about this. You have a camera sitting, you have a supermarket, you have a camera sitting in the front and one in the exit. You take a picture of folks, you do image analysis on people in the supermarket right now. Suddenly you realize most of them are women and they're between 30 and 40. So you change the loudspeaker to do commercials for things that's interesting for women between 30 and 40 and so forth. I mean, there's no end to where this could take us when we get this moving on. And this, of course, is why we have the cloud being so interesting. The vast amount of services that can be utilized when you're in the cloud will continue to grow. And right now we have 80% of businesses showing interest, or at least moving to the cloud at this point. And the declining number of only 8% saying we don't care. And probably there'll always be somebody that doesn't care. If you run business of, doing things on a submerged submarine, I guess cloud might not be that interesting. But otherwise, this is going to be something we will see, all of us. And that brings us back to the Common Data Service and Dynamics 365 Tenerife. Because having the Common Data Service, let us look at what this really is. We get all our entities from Dynamics 365 into the cloud. Then we add things from the office world in here. That kind of fill in the grid with additional info we get put in here. On top of that, let's go ahead and put, LinkedIn information you also get. You see, you broaden not your data set, but you broaden your graph of data. And then let's take all your data, all the partner solution data in there, and then stick all that into the Common Data Service, and then start to produce insights. One of them could be, it seems to be interesting that the top sales you have is from the people that studied at Harvard. I can see that in LinkedIn. And, by the way, worked for a startup company for more than 3 years in their younger years. Okay, now you know where to look for your next sales guy and so forth. You can do these insights across all these products, and this is what it's all about. That's why we need the big data. That's why we need to move into the cloud to be able to, put all these features on top of what we got today. And speaking of cloud, and speaking of putting things in the cloud, we also need to run the cloud. I know that Vincent is eager to talk about running the cloud. And he got a mic now. Does it work?
I understand you're going to get one in a minute. Thank you, Thomas. So, yeah, we're going to talk a lot about the cloud, as Thomas said. And we are running our service, Dynamics 365 Tenerife. It's a world-class cloud platform. And this is Tech Days after all, so I want to give you some insight on what's going on and what it takes to run a service like this one. And the reason why I want to show you that is that to help you see how complex it is to run a service with the level of quality we want to provide. So some of you might have tried our trial or the original project Madeira, Dynamics 365 Financial. How many of you have tried the evaluation? Can you show hands? Yeah, a few people. All right. So for those of you who haven't tried, it's very simple. You go to our Dynamics 365 website and you sign up, entering your email and a couple of information about your company. And literally within minutes, we spin up a tenant for you, which you can start using. And this is a full Dynamics 365 Tenerife service running out there. Now, this whole sign-up process is in itself pretty complex, and it could be the subject for an entire session. So I won't spend too much time on this, but instead I will try to tell you a little bit about how the service is architected and how it runs once it has been provisioned. Last year, if you recall, I talked a little bit about Azure Service Fabric, because it's a very important technology which we are basing our service on. So I'll do a quick refresh on this for those of you who weren't here last year, or if you don't remember. So traditionally, if you have a monolithic application like the one represented on that slide, and you want to put it into the cloud, you would a naive approach would be to spawn a bunch of virtual machines and deploy this application on each of these machines. That's fine, but the problem with that is that it doesn't scale very well. In this application, you might have several services. Typically, we have several services for various purposes. These are the colored box in the slide that they represent, let's say, different services. For example, the red one could be your service servicing request from your web client, from the browser. The green one could be something else, doing like scheduled work on a time base in the time based fashion. Now, when you get a lot of users on your service, you might need more computer power. You might need more compute time, for example, to serve your web requests. So you need more of the red stuff, but your green stuff might not need more. It might not be scaling linearly with the number of users. So you don't need as many green stuff as you need red stuff. So, but if you want to scale out, and you will add more virtual machines, and you will have to duplicate everything, all the services, which is not an optimal use of your resources in Azure. So instead, what you do is that you break out your application into microservices, and you deploy these microservices in a set of virtual machines arranged in a cluster. And but you don't have, you don't have to deploy as many services as there is per application. You can scale depending on which one you need the most. So you can have more of the red ones and less of the green ones, if that's what you need. And that's, of course, provides you with a more optimal use of resources. Now, in order to do that, you need some platform, you need something to manage that. You need something to manage the deployment. You need some technology to allow this service to talk to each other, to version the microservices. And that is what Service Fabric is doing for you. So that's a very important piece of technology. It's a very mature technology that has been created originally to manage Azure itself. And so originally were used internally by Microsoft and been productized later for all services. So that was Service Fabric. Now, so how does it look like for Dynamics 365 Tenerife? If we talk about the compute plane, so the computation plane of the service, we have a Service Fabric cluster like the one I showed on the previous slide. Which consists of 5 virtual machines, and on these machines we deploy services like the NSD, the web client, some monitoring services, and this is all wrapped into a virtual network. And in front of that, there is the application gateway that takes care of servicing requests coming from the web client, OData requests from our Visual Studio Code development environment. And the application gateway routes this request to the right services and to the right machines. Now, on the next slide, please. Thank you. On the data plane, so the data is all, of course, in SQL Azure, and we have a set of database which are buffer tenant. I'll get back to that. And we have the active tenants, which are actually the databases used by the service. And we have, these are all standalone database. And we have the application database, which are shared typically across a cluster. So the buffer tenant, these are tenants which are not actually in use yet, but these are databases we pre-hydrate with the data and which are ready to be used and ready to be mounted into the service when we sign up. And this is how we can, for example, achieve a very fast sign-up time from the time you just enter your email and go and say sign up. Then we take a buffer tenant and mount it and put it on an existing service within a few seconds. So these databases, they are a part of something called Azure Elastic Pool, and I'll get back to that. Elastic Pool is a really great Azure technology that helps you optimize your database resource and your database cost. But I'll get back to it in a second. We have another way to deploy services, and this is, instead of having one database per tenant, we can actually share a database and have all the tenants or a large number of tenants into one big database. And if you remember the slide, the ecosystem slide that Thomas showed you earlier, the invoicing app, which is part of the Office 365 Business Edition, which is based on the NAV stack, is actually deployed on a shared database. So this technology is not available on-prem, but yet, at least. But this is also something we can do in the cloud. So this is cloud only. So what's the advantage of this? Well, there's a lot of good things about sharing the database across tenants. It's mostly a cost optimization, but also query plans get shared, and we can do schema upgrades in a very efficient manner. Of course, the drawback is that we don't get any help for SQL Azure itself, for example, for doing backup. If we want to back up a single tenant, we'll have to write some code, write some scripts to do it, and the same thing for restoring. While if we run tenants in their own database, then we can just use the built-in functionality of SQL Azure. But that was just to tell you that we also have had in our toolbox. So. I said I'll get back to the Elastic Pool. So when you go on the Azure portal and buy a database, a SQL Azure database, you choose its size with a unit which is called DTU, which stands for Database Transaction Unit. So it's a mix of CPU, memory, and I/O, and that's kind of a measure for determining how powerful the database is. If you pick a single database, you will have to choose a certain number of DTUs at 200, and that's the number of DTUs you have to perform your transaction in the database. And if you do more transactions that your database can allow, then you'll get throttle. So in order to optimize the use of resources, Elastic Pool is a great thing, because typically when you have a large number of tenants like we have for our service, not all tenants are busy at all times. So you might be one tenant which is doing a lot of transactions while a lot of the other ones are doing practically nothing. And then at a different point in time, there's going to be the reverse situation. So the idea is with Elastic Pool is to group database into a pool where they actually share transaction units, and then that means you have a capacity available to you, but you are optimizing the use of it to whoever needs it the most. Now, of course, when you do that, you bet on the fact that the distribution of usage is going to be in such a way that not everybody is going to use a lot of transactions at the same time. But we have no way to know when we put this database into an Elastic Pool. We don't know if incidentally all the users are going to perform a lot of transactions at the same time. That could potentially happen. So to alleviate that, we have our pool optimizer service, which is a service that monitors the database in the pools and go and ask all the database, and once in a while how are you doing, and we might end up in a situation like illustrated here, where we have a couple of databases in a pool which are actually running hot and doing a lot of transaction. And what the pool optimizer service does, it looks at another pool which is not as busy, pick up a couple of databases and move them to that pool, and thus giving more headroom to the pool which is getting overloaded. And doing that, we can keep the service running with a high level of performance. So that was just one example of one of the services we have running there, and taking care of optimizing the performance of the product. Now, if we put it all together, that's what it looks like. So we have the compute plane and the data plane, and this is the Dynamics 365 Tenerife in the cloud. This is how it looks like. This is how a cluster looks like. So one of the things we spend a lot of time on is trying to optimize the cost of our resources, of course, because we also have to pay for our Azure consumption, like everybody else. So there's a lot of dimensions, there's a lot of things you need to decide when you provision all these services. You know, how big are the database? How many databases you put in a pool? How big are the virtual machines? How many machines do you put in a cluster? All these things are going to influence and impact not only the cost of your service, but also the performance. So you might, spend a lot of money on CPU, but maybe that's not what you need. Maybe you need more database power. So here's an example of dimensioning of a service like this one. It's just an example. We keep fine-tuning all the time how we dimension these deployments. So the machines are at D2 V2s. We have a standard 200 EDTU pool. The application database are S2 or S1, and we have a cap of 20 EDTU per tenant database. What we do in order to determine these numbers, typically what we do is that we run some tests internally, trying to simulate real usage of the product, but of course it's only a simulation. And then we, based on these tests, these load tests, we determine dimensions for these clusters. And then we put a little bit of safety on top of that. We want to make sure that when we actually deploy the service, it's still running smooth. And then we deploy the service and we observe what's going on and adjust. So usually we are able to turn it down a notch and save a little bit of money by adjusting things in there when we see the real usage, how the service gets used for real. So these services, if we look in terms of worldwide presence, they are deployed in the entire world. So we have a set of services which we call global services. These are singleton, if you will. There's only one instance of them running. There are things like the global tenant manager or the landing page, which are the global tenant manager, for example, is a directory that's going to tell you where your tenant is. When you enter the URL in your browser, it's going to go and tell you you are based on your AAD. It's going to tell you where your tenant is actually located. So we only have one set of this servicing for the entire world deployed in a US data center. And then for each region, we have a set of services which are the actual mechanics which are driving the service for the signups, for the pool optimizer I was talking about just before is part of these services. So we have one set of these services per region, and currently we have presence in the US, in Canada, Northern Europe, and Western Europe. And very soon we'll be deploying. You saw the slides from that Thomas showed before, and we're going to deploy in other countries. We're going to Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, East Asia, and Oceania. And right now we have, we're getting very good at deploying these services. So we can potentially come in a new data center with very short time, like within a day or something. We can have some presence there. But once we have deployed all these services and all these machinery is kind of active in Azure and running and all the customers are using the products, we of course need to make sure that it's running smoothly. So we need to monitor it and keep an eye on it, which brings me to telemetry. So I want to talk a little bit about the telemetry. It's a very important things of running very important part of running a service. So telemetry is usually divided into three categories. There's monitoring and alerting, which is basically, keeping an eye on certain things, like, for example, is the tenant actually running or is it down? And if it's down, somebody's going to get a phone call. And there's diagnostics. Diagnostic is the part where you go and you got the phone call that something is wrong. So you go and use some tools and look at the logs, look at some, do some queries. I'll show you some examples of that in a minute, and try to figure out what went wrong, what's going on, and what should be done to get the customer back and running. And finally, there's analytics. Analytics is more about looking at maybe historical data, and which, for example, we look at the monthly active usage of the service, the weekly active usage. We can, want to know maybe how many, services are running, in a certain region using a certain feature of the product. So these are analytics. So these are three different aspects of telemetry. So let's look at how simple it is to actually generate that data. Not that simple. So this is a diagram, architectural diagram that tries to illustrate how we gather our telemetry. We have, so I'll do a little bit of pointing. Let me get the laser here. There we go. So here we have an application service cluster. You'll recognize the NST and the IIS, and we are shoving events into the event viewer here into the event log, and they get propagated through the monitoring service here, and they go into Cosmos. Cosmos is our big data technology, which is actually publicly available as well. It contains literally, petabyte of data, and it's used by a lot of services within Microsoft, and that's typically for analytics data. We talk about the cold path because it takes a little bit of time to retrieve data from Cosmos. On the other hand, it has really long time storage, and it allows to store a large quantity of data. Then there's Custo, which is something which is more like a warm path. We can do queries. It's for diagnostics. Down there we have Geneva, which is our alerting tool. So if a tenant is down, we're going to send a message to Geneva, and somebody in the organization will get a phone call and have to handle this immediately. Now, when we log this data, we also have to be aware when we cross actually country lines, because country borders, because of legislation. We have to be very aware where the data is stored. So we have that entirely under control, and at the same time we also need to scrub all the data from personal information. So we're not storing anything like emails and phone numbers or addresses. So there's a lot of things going on also to get rid of this information. So we can only have diagnostic information and monitoring information, but no private information. So let me show you quickly how it looks like. So typically we would go into this tool, which is ICM Tall. So every time something is detected in our service as not doing what it should, we actually emit an incident here. Here is a list of this is the real thing. It shows all the incidents that we have currently. You can see all of them are either resolved or mitigated. And if I click on one incident, I already get some of the data. So this is all generated by our monitoring and our telemetry, and we put that into this tool. So we get some data of when this has been detected, which region it is in, and things like that. And then I can go and look at the actual metrics. So this is let's imagine I'm an engineer on call, and then I got a call there is something wrong with that tenant. So I will typically go and follow that incident, and we'll go and look at this particular virtual machine. Maybe I will look at the processor time, or there is we have information like the thread count on this machine. Here we have a bunch of errors, for example, that has been detected. Something with some scheduling session that didn't went well. And if I want to know, I can go all the way to the code and trace this actual message to the code by looking at that tag, which is the tag we use for all the events. And I could go into our code base. This is our code base. So the Dynamics 365 Tenerife code base. Search for that tag, and that will bring me exactly to the file where this actual tracing event is emitted. So I can look at the code. I can see here, there is a diagnostic message that has been sent at that particular exception catching here. So this is how we do telemetry. So why am I showing you all that? As I said at the start of the section, I want to give you a little bit of insight of the complexity that is involved in running a service like this one. But also because we are very proud. We are running a world-class service. We are very proud of what we achieved there, and we really would like this to be your new home and a new home for your solutions. So this is what we can offer you. We can run all these things for you. So you only have to focus on your business and what you're good at, and we can take care of all the complexity of running a service on that scale in the cloud. And with that, I will hand it over to Thomas, who's going to talk about how you can develop solutions for the cloud.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Yep. Thank you. So last year in the lab section, we talked about extension 2.0, and I'm very proud to show you what we made. We're not going to talk about extension 3.0 in the lab sections this year, but don't worry, it will be here at some point for sure. 2 years ago, we talked about extension 1.0, so this is actually a nice trend we are making here. So extensions are the way to build apps and to do customization of our product moving forward. I don't hope anybody has missed that point, because that is going to be the most important point, because extensions can coexist. It will solve at least the majority of the upgrade problems and so forth. So what I'm going to talk about today is the big picture of what's in extension 2.0. So first of all, we started the journey of developing the Seaside replacement, the new VS Code-based development environment. I think it's phenomenal, and it contains a new compiler. And this has been, an internal joke in Microsoft for many years. We need a new compiler. If only we could have a new compiler. And eventually, after 10 years, we got it. But it's interesting, because what happens when you have a new compiler is that it allows you to actually start thinking about the language constructs, which we couldn't change in the Seaside code base due to a variety of reasons. And extensions 2.0 are not seen by Seaside at all. So we can do whatever we like in extensions 2.0, since that is only compiled by the new modern development. And that led us to introduce what we call extension objects. And extension objects means, instead of modifying the existing table object if you're adding a field, instead we are creating an entirely new object that contains all the extra stuff you want to add on to the table object or page object or whatever it might be. And then lastly, we also had done a lot of work in the client to do an in-client designer. And let's start there. The in-client designer allows you to go and create a full-fledged extension without even touching VS Code or without writing any code and so forth. It allows you to do visually do the changes. You can try it on multiple display targets. And instead of reading this slide, let me just go ahead and demo it. That's usually more compelling. So what I have here is the NAV in the cloud, or Dynamics 365 Tenerife. Still allowed to say NAV, but I'll learn it in a year. So up here in the corner, I have my designer mode. And basically I can go into design mode on any page. I can design 10 pages at the same time. And when I'm kind of done, that will be turned into an extension. Let me go to the customer page to make it simple. So I go to my customer list, go to my customer card, and in here I then open the designer, but it wouldn't matter where I open the designer, I just keep running in design mode, so to speak. I open my designer here, and now you can see the purple bar turned up, and now I can start doing changes on the fly with this screen. We are still running live data, by the way, so I can still do all the actions and stuff. There's no limit to what I can do. I'm just doing designing on top of this. Let's say I don't like the blocked feature, so I'll go here. You see this small triangle that allows you to pick up this field, move it elsewhere, or you can click on the triangle to get options, and one of the options is remove this thing, I don't need it. Okay, I'll remove it. And then I know in the system, in the database, there's a field called name2, and I actually would like to use that, so I need to have this field being brought in here. Go to more and say I want to add a field, an already existing field. I'll take the name2. You see it says it's ready, meaning it's in the data set. It exists, it's just not shown on this page, but I want to bring it in. I simply drag it onto the form and I want to put it here. So now I have the name2. Interestingly enough, it contains data, that's interesting. And at the same time, I don't like this general header here, so let me just change that to a single G. That's it. That constitutes my very advanced first-made extension using the inclined designer. So when I'm done, I kind of go, okay, I'm going to stop designing now. Before I do that, it would be nice to know if this looks nice also on the phone. So let me just change the display target here to a phone. So I can see now, okay, I have my name 2. You see the caption is now a G. And again, it's live data. I can actually go fill in figures here if I want to. There's nothing preventing me from actually entering data in this form if I want to. I can also look at the tablet format to see what the tablet format would look like with the changes I just made. But after I'm done with this, I go stop designing. And when I go stop designing, it comes out and says, okay, you're now creating an extension, buddy, so let me have the name of the extension. Okay, let me put it Thomas, that's very creative. Publish, oh, well, okay, now it's going to be Thomas. Very creative. And there's a download code. I'll get back to that in a second. So I'm not going to activate the download code at this point, but that allows you to actually get to the code, and I'll get back to that in a second. So I just put save here. And what happens between the scenes now is this changes that I did is then mangled into extension objects. Those extension objects are compiled into a package. That package is deployed onto the system and installed for my tenant. So as you see now, out of design mode, the block field is gone, the name2 is here, and the caption is a G. I can actually prove this by going and say, okay, let me jump into extension management. If I go to extension management, here I have a list of all the extensions that are currently on my system, and voila, one of them is the Thomas extension at the bottom, and it's actually currently installed. Now I can do several things here. I can click on it, get some info about the publisher, which is also Thomas, and then I can uninstall it if I want to. And let me just go ahead and do that. So if I uninstall the extension again, and go back to my form from before, somebody got me there, okay. Can we erase the recording? If I go back to my page, that's before, yes. I hate when that happens, okay. And I bring out my customer form page. Damn it. I've been in this business too long. Michael, can I join you somewhere? And so, okay. So, now that's going to ruin my entire day, All right. As you see, the block field is back, and name2 is gone because I uninstalled the extension, so my page is now back to the original form. So, that's kind of, I'm allowed to say that, right? So, that covers the inclined designer. So I get to do a full extension. It also allows me to kind of start up my customization of my pages in the various forms, using the in-client designer here. So, but let's say I want to introduce some code. I want to do a validation of the length of my fields or something. So now I need to do some coding, and I can't do coding in the in-client designer. To do that, I actually need to use the VS Code. So to enable that, let's look at the VS Code here. So again, that's a completely different experience from Seaside. It's a modern experience, meaning we get all the IntelliSense, we get all the type completion, we get snippets, we get color highlighting that actually works. We get a ton of things in here, and what we get is a round trip between the server and the VS Code. Let me go demo that for you. So what I do, I'm going to go back to extension management. Because even though I uninstalled my extension from before, it's still published onto the system. So it's still sitting in there, ready to be reinstalled if I so want. You see, it's not installed, but the Tama thing is still there. So all my changes are still preserved and kept in this extension that sits here. And I can go in here and go, okay, let me download the source for this extension. And by doing that, what I get a zip file. I get a zip file with a full-fledged VS Code project. Good to go. I don't need to do anything with it, almost. I'll get back to that in a second. So I go save this, and I have a folder on my machine for this purpose, a demo folder. So I'll just put it here. I'll call it Thomas. Call it nothing. All right. Demo. I'll call it Thomas.zip. Okay, go to the folder itself. See, I have my zip file here. If I go into the zip file, you'll see the full project being there. Before I can use it, of course, I need to extract this project. So I just go back here and extract everything from that zip file. Extract everything. So now I have a Thomas folder with everything in the zip file. Okay. So I close all these folders, and then I'm going to open Visual Studio Code. And one of the features in Visual Studio Code is that projects are basically defined by a folder. So that's very nice. So what I'm going to do now is going to go open a folder. And I'm going to do the Thomas folder I just had from before. And that will then open up my project here. There's a ton of things in here, not a ton of things, but there's the page extension 5100. That's the one I did before. We'll dig into that in a second. But under the .vs code folder, there's a launch.json file. And that file contains the connection to the server, which is pretty clever, because the server knows about itself. So when that generated the zip file, it put all the information about how to reach me into that zip file, into the launch.json, and put that into the project. So we're basically good to go at this point. I can, from this project, now connect to the server because the server told me how to do that. And if we look at the page extension itself, you'll see the code here. It's actually pretty simple. But first of all, notice that it's a page extension object. It's not a page object, it's an extension object. So this is a new object type that's not understood by Seaside, but only understood by the new modern developer experience inside VS Code. And it extends the customer card. And then comes next problem. What is a customer card? How does VS Code knows about customer card? And that's another feature we put into the communication between VS Code and the server, that VS Code can ask the server for, give me all the symbolic info you have right now. And it'll receive a package with all the info on the base application, but it'll also receive symbolic info from all possible apps on the server. So you can take dependencies on other apps and build upon them and use their fields in your app and so forth. And everything will get tracked. So this extension will only work if that other extension is also there and so forth. That'll happen more or less automatically when you take dependencies on other extensions. All right, so let's do a change in here. Let's put in some code here. This name to field, I want to make sure you always enter, let's say, 5 characters into this. So I'll just write some code here, and I'll write a trigger. You see you get this, immediately get the IntelliSense here, which is very nice, on validate. Begin, and obviously it gives me the end. That was nice. If sterling of name 2 is less than 5. Something along this line, right? I do not use beginner. Don't take my syntax or my whatever here. It's not demo code. All right, so what I need to do now is I basically need to save this, and then I need to tell the server I've done some changes to the extension. Can you please pick that up and start running with it? And I can do that in several ways, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say to the server, please take this extension, replace whatever you got in there, if you have something having the same ID, and then open yourself into designer mode, and let's continue where I left in VS Code, kind of to demonstrate the back and forth scenario here. So by do that, I will press F6. When I do that, I'll get an error, because the VS Code would not know how to start the server on which page. Let me just do it anyways. Pressing F6 here, you'll see an error come up at the bottom saying, please provide a start object ID in the JSON launch file. That's the one thing the server don't know where I want to start, and VS Code doesn't know it either. So I need to put in the object ID for where to start. So I go into the launch.json and just add this start up. Object ID in 22, nice place to start, so I'll do that. Right, that's it. Now I'll save this, and then I'll go and push this to the server at this point. What will happen then is it compiles the package, it loads up the server now, and this time I'll be directly into design mode on page 22, and at the same time, and I can again navigate around pages here, I can go in and I can see my changes are actually there. Let me just stop designing for a second and show you the changes here. If I try to go only 2 characters, I get the error here, right? So the too short shows up now. Okay, I can do other changes. So let's say, okay, I'll accept this. Let me pop in back to, I can go in and out of this design mode. It doesn't matter. The connection has now been created between the VS Code and the server, or the client here itself. Let me do another change. Let me change this GUI thing back to GUI, just to make a single change here. And let me move this field, grab it, move that. I want it over here, just to do some crazy stuff. So I can do additional changes here. And when I do that, again, I can stop designing. I can save this. When I save it, I update the extension which is on my system. So we are good to go on the system. But VS Code hasn't been told. So if I go back to VS Code at this point and look at my extensions, you'll see the caption in here is still a G. But I can now ask VS Code, please go to the server and pick up whatever was happening over there. I do that by pressing F7. And when doing that, you see immediately it turns into GUI, and the latest change also was picked up and brought into the server. And again, I can go uninstall the entire thing afterwards, of course. So that brought us into, through extension objects and the in-client designer, and then the modern development environment. But that's not all. Of course, there are additional things that goes into the definition of extensions. And before I talk about that, let's just look at the extension object source file here. If you see on the left side, you'll see the extension 1.0, let's call it the merge specification file, and how that look on the extension 2.0 source file. It becomes much more simplified when you do a page or a table extension as shown here. You just do the things you need to add, whereas the other thing is go merge this and this merge specification. Much more simple, and again, C-side is not involved in this, which I'll get back to in a second, is a great addition. Now, another thing that comes with the extension objects is increased functionality. One thing that we lacked in the extension 1.0 was that code could only be added in code units. and that meant you have to step into a different function by yourself, and thereby you lost access to Cur page if you were doing a page extension or doing an extension to pages. That's been fixed now. Page extension does have access to Cur page, so you now can do whatever you can do in a page, you can also do in a page extension almost. And also you can put the code where you kind of put it in the extension object. You don't need to do additional code units to write code, which you had to do in extension 1.0. So next chapter of this is the storage of extensions. We also changed that, and there are several reasons for doing this. First of all, we ran into some limits on the record size. If you start adding a lot of extension and everybody wants to extend the customer object, at some point you run into the limit of the SQL Server's row size, which was a problem. So we changed that or mitigated that by saying every extension now gets its own table. So you have a table with the primary key of the table you're extending as a foreign key, and then you can add your own fields. And that is also needed because in the situation where we were extending or changing the original schema of the table, that led to some challenges. When you're uninstalling extension, we would need to back up all the data into one of these archive tables. If you have it sitting in a table by itself, the backup actually has already been done for you. And finally, the feature that Vincent was talking about that we need for the cloud so far, the shared database where we have multiple tenants in a database. What if one tenant want to add a field to customer but another tenant does not want that? Now we can't have differentiated schema since we're sharing the database, and that led to a ton of trouble going that down that route. So we ended up doing what we call companion tables, which turns out to be a great advantage for a lot of scenarios. So if we look at this in a schematic fashion, on the top here you'll see the customer object being extended as it used to be. There's a blue and a red extension here, and they just added their field to the customer row. Whereas in extension 2.0, there will be a table for each extension, adding the foreign key to the customer, and then the red field and the blue extension will have the blue field. When you do that, that means that you have a way during uninstall just to keep the companion table as your backup for all the data that particular extension added, which is great. If you add new tables, you just get normal tables. But table extensions generate these companion tables. AL does not change, let me emphasize that. Everything is solved in the engine by use of joins. So the AL code will still see the broad record. We do not internally have any limits to the size of a record. So you just do like you used to do, modify your field and go say modify or insert, and magically we will put it into all the right companion tables where needed and so forth. So moving forward from storage into deploy and install. That's also interesting here because we can now do installations without necessarily upgrading. It's becoming two distinct operations, install and upgrade. Earlier, when you upgraded the system, the upgrade code really didn't know whether it was a new installation or whether it was an upgrade. Or even worse, whether it was a reinstallation after a pause of a week. So there was no way of knowing whether the data in the archive table you could see was actually up to date and so forth. We separated that now so you have a clear path or clear-cut upgrade code. You know you are upgrading with the things right now. There are also some changes to the way we do schema changes. We do not do schema changes when you publish things onto the system. As soon as you put things onto the system, the only thing that happens is basically we're registering this tenant would like, or this system would like to have access to these apps, and that's it. When we then later install them, then we get to the point of, okay, this tenant needs to have access to this application, and to do that we need to sync his database, and at that point we end up doing the necessary schema changes. Another thing we are changing is that we are only doing add-on changes, which is a general principle. So the entire thing here is you can always add columns to your original table. If you need to remove columns, you basically need to abandon them. And then we will have a cleanup round you can run at some point, and thereby you'll cut the backwards compatibility to everything that was behind. And that probably is something we need to run in offline mode when you need to do all the cleanup. But as long as we're just adding, everything runs instantly in add-on mode. We also have a new triggers coming up. When you're doing installations, you get these two triggers. So you have an on-install per company and on-install per database, allowing you to write code in here. So I would like to call this once, so I would like to call this once for every company table set that is in this particular database, which is something we didn't have before either. Moving on to upgrade. Upgrade, again, is also something that's been troublesome. We're making it more and more easy, and the biggest change we did this time is we are making sure that you can run the full upgrade of both the base application and all your extensions on a given database in a single transaction, thereby allowing you to say, I want to upgrade this entire thing, and if even the slightest thing fails, I want to be back to where I started with no change whatsoever, and that we support. That, however, generates the problem of what if you're doing a big upgrade. I'd actually like to have the base upgrade first, and then try to upgrade my 11 extensions one at a time, and if one of them fail, I'll deal with that, but I want to preserve what I've done already. So that's already also supported, which is shown by the graph here on the right. So we support running everything in one transaction, or during the upgrade you can decide to have individual transaction breaks between the base and then the individual extensions, if so want. And of course, there's also some upgrade trigger code that allows you to come in and write code during upgrade, which probably is necessary in some cases to do. And here's shown the database one, but there's also the corresponding company, per company upgrade triggers if you need them. So that's kind of the big picture of extensions, and if you want to see more about this, I know that there's a client session where we show additional things about the client, and Esben and Stanislav have a session about the development tools. Both of these sessions are concurrently and running right after the keynote. So Extension 2.0 is here to stay. It's a super way of doing upgrades. I'm really thrilled about seeing the modern development environment evolving. The in-client designer is fabulous, and it's a very good place to get started and actually have this interaction between both modern development and the in-client designer is very nice. It feels natural to do it like that. And you can see what's happening on different form factors. I think it's a super great progress that's been happening here. And talking about integration, talking about extensions, Vincent has the next section on exactly that. There you go.
Thank you, Thomas. So, when we talk about the ecosystem before, Thomas showed you that slide, and it's a very, very powerful and very wide ecosystem, and I don't think any ERP product has such a rich ecosystem, and we can integrate with really a lot of other Microsoft technology, things like Office 365. Obviously, we've always been good at integrating with Office 365 and Office in general, Power BI, Microsoft Flow, Power Apps. These are all Microsoft technology you can integrate with Dynamics 365 Tenerife. And these integrations are more or less available out of the box. You don't need to write code to integrate with this, or very little code. But if you don't think it's enough, if you want to take it to the next level, then you might want to use other integration technology, and that's where connected app come into play. So add-on apps are extension based, like Thomas described before, and the CL code. You're going to write some CL code to do extensions. So that's the more or less traditional way to extend Dynamics 365 Tenerife. But if you want to go beyond that, you can go into the realm of connect apps, and the way you interact with the system is through REST API. So any platform or any technology that supports REST, you can use to write connect apps. And here's an example of a few technologies that support that. I think pretty much any platform, any technology supports REST, and if it doesn't, you probably want to stay away from it anyway. And by using these APIs, you can do something entirely different. You can write mobile apps using Xamarin. You can use Node.js, if that's what you want. You can go to the Mac and use Swift, Python, what have you. We have published, I believe at that stage, 44 APIs. So these are the entities we are exposing to the APIs now, and there are more to come very soon. They are all documented. So I'm going to show you quickly how you can. I'll do a quick demo how you can use these APIs. That's pretty simple. So there is this. If you're not familiar with this tool, it's called Postman. I recommend it if you do REST and you work with REST API. It's a very cool tool because you can of course code your way out of it, but it's you always have to do a lot of things around authentication and cookies and that kind of thing. So this tool allows you to do all that from a graphical user interface. So it's very practical. So I'm going to use it to demo it. I have my tenant here, which is at that URL. That's the URL of my tenant, and the APIs are exposed on that port. So if I issue a simple REST call on that URL, just appending ms/odata v4, that's going to return to me in a JSON format a list of actually all the APIs. So basically the slide I had before with the 44 APIs, but in a JSON format that are available on that particular tenant. So it's kind of a metadata for the REST APIs. So that can be helpful to know what this tenant is actually supporting. There's another call you can do which gives you even more information on the APIs. I can get with this call here, so if you look at the URL, I still have the URL of my tenant, the port, and then I just add company, and then I have to specify, because it's a cloud deployment, I have to specify which tenant it is. And if I fire that call, it's going to return to me again in a nicely formatted JSON package information of the two companies which are on that tenant. Third example, your customers. So I have the URL of my client here, of my tenant, sorry, and I have to specify the companies and then the company for which I want the customers and /customer, and again I'll get almost instantly a list of all the customers on that tenant. So very easy, it's just then you can start coding your way out of anything with that. You can start passing a JSON. We also support actions, so you can actually trigger action, insert data through this REST API. So it's a very powerful way to extend Dynamics 365. And now, let me get to the slides. So that was for extending, beyond the Microsoft ecosystem and get to maybe another ecosystem if you wish to. Now the next thing I want to talk about. Now Thomas talked a bit about the future and what's coming up and the future of extensions. So I want to give you a sneak peek of UX refresh. So we're going to do a refresh of Dynamics 365 Tenerife for the clients in 2018. And I want to give you our UX team has done a fantastic work. So I really would like to show this to you. So here's it. Here's how it's going to look like. So if you remember the term, a lot of people are still calling the Windows client the role tailor client, because that's when we introduced the role tailor. But role tailoring is not about running on Windows. It's actually a concept which is about tailoring the interface for a specific user. So we're still using that concept. We still believe in role tailoring, And what you're seeing here is the business manager role center. It's the most versatile role center. That's the one we traditionally use to do our UX design because it contains a little bit of everything. It's not too specialized. We have changed the layout. There's a new navigation, as you can see at the top, which is fast navigation. We are getting rid of the sidebar navigation, which was inspired by Outlook. So this is gone, and it's more, more fresh and more modern. It's kind of, my business news type of view of the data we are presenting here. So we will introduce another concept here. If you click on the tile, you'll get what we call a peek view of the data, which allows you to see some of the data without having to navigate to a new page. So that's a new concept as well. We will introduce there. And if I go over to the list view, again, fresh design. It's inspired actually from the Financial Times layout. If you are familiar with that layout, this newspaper Financial Times, that's how data is displayed. Fresh new layout. And again, here we have the possibility to pick on the data on that particular row without having to navigate to a page. That could be, for example, that would most likely be what currently is displayed in a fact box, and maybe even replace the fact box altogether in the end. And this is our new customer card. I hope you like it. We're very proud of it. Again, we changed the layout pretty significantly. What used to be in the summary, a fact box on the side is now presented in a horizontal design at the top, because usually that's where summary and important information is displayed. Of course, we'll have the equivalent design for tablet and phone, and all of this doesn't require code change. It will still be based on the same metadata. So your solution will be fully functional with that new UX design when we'll release it. And with that, we're getting into the fun part of that presentation. So we usually talk about things from the lab. That's tradition we have in NAV TechDays. And before I hand it over to Thomas, a small disclaimer: none of the things we are going to show here are released. Well, some of them, but most are not, and there's no guarantee that's ever going to be released in the product. Thank you.
Yep, that's right. This is kind of like dreamland for some things, but the first thing I'm going to start with this year is actually released. It still belongs into the lab because I think it's a little bit nerdy, but on the other hand, it has proven itself to be extremely useful. So without any further hesitation, let me jump into this. And this is the Docker technology and how we actually offer a ton of things on Docker today that you can go ahead and utilize. And let's start with just explaining a little bit what is Docker. And this is kind of a technical explanation, but typically when you run software, you don't want two software applications to override each other's memory. You get that by different processes. But what about, you don't want two software applications to override each other's settings, which are stored in the registry or which are stored in the file system somewhere in config files or so forth. That you don't get any protection from in the normal world. Well, what you can do then is you can start creating virtual machines, which is what typically is done, and then you end up with a picture like this on the left side here. So you have your own host operating system, the physical server, and then you have the hypervisor sitting on top of that, and then you generate virtual machines, and now clearly you have the necessary separation between your things. Now, the problem here, of course, is it's a bit clunky, right? When you need to reboot that particular VM, you need to reboot a guest operating system inside the virtual machine. You use a lot of memory by having 3 versions in this particular picture of the operating system running and so forth. So what this Docker team has made, they came up with a different form of virtualization, a way more lightweight. They call it a container, which essentially says we're going to virtualize the file system we're going to and thereby we're going to virtualize the register, because register is basically just stored in a file. We're going to virtualize the network connection. We're going to virtualize all those things, but we're not going to give you an entirely new operating system. We do this in cooperation with the operating system, and Docker itself is basically just an application you run on your own machine. So what you do, you run the Docker, and that just starts up as a service, and now you have a Docker command you can call and thereby initiate new processes. I'll get back and do a demo in a second, but let me just talk a little bit about what we're using this for. First of all, it requires an image. When you run Docker, you go Docker and then run an image name. That means Docker will now go to a repository which sits in the cloud and find that image. And if you don't have it in your cache on the system, Docker keeps a cache of all the images you run previously. It'll download automatically and then run. Next time it'll run way faster because you already have the image. Images can be built upon other images. So you can imagine, like this picture is showing that you have a base image and then a separate image, and those two together would then, in this case, form the image needed to run NAV 2017. But if you were to run 2016, you would already have half the image in your cache and only need to download the remaining part. So what are we using all this for? Well, today, let me just skip this one two at a time. Today what we are doing is we are basically shipping all our builds as Docker images. All the cumulative updates, all the controversions, all those things sits in the official repository in the cloud, ready to be run. And let me give you a demo of how you can do that. As you see, there's no downloading, there's no unpacking, installing, configuring, uninstalling, cleaning up the machine or whatever. This is just so clean, which is why I'm thrilled about this technology in general. Thank you. So what I have here is a blank machine, and I do have a cheat sheet, so to not do the typing, so I'll just open that one. And then I'll open a command prompt, because what I have here is just a plain normal command prompt. I already downloaded Docker. You go to www.docker.com, download Docker for Windows, that's it. It's an executable you install on your machine, and it's free. Okay, so what I can do now, I can do several things. Let me just start with the most simplistic one. This is Docker run Microsoft Dynamics NAV. And that, which version is this? Which country is which? And that just means the latest one. So you always get the latest one if you do this. The first time we download it to the cache, then you need to update your cache to change it. But whenever you run this on a blank machine, you'll always get the latest one. You don't need to put in, as you can see in the third line here, I ask for cumulative update 25, or I ask for the Danish version, or whatever. This will just give you the latest W1 version. Let me copy that and go in here and paste it in here, and then go run. What happens now is that the Docker will start checking whether I have all the right images in place here. It'll go to the server, check whether everything is in place. While I'm doing that, let me go and explain a little bit what goes on in, let's say, the bottom line here. You see there's added something -v and then c/demo and so forth. What I'm doing here is I'm mapping a directory between the host machine and the file system inside the Docker container, so to speak. And that allows me to easily copy files between the Docker container and the host operating system. The Docker container itself gets a C drive that comes from the image. It does not get anything from the host machine unless I choose to map it into this. There's complete isolation here. So this one is booting up. Let me start another one while we're waiting here. So I'll copy this one. I'll start another command prompt. I'll explain in a second why I do that. And have that one running. And this is the Danish version. So on the same machine now, I'm concurrently starting two versions of NAV, and the Docker image contains everything. It contains a SQL server, it contains the NAV already installed into the image, config files pointing to that machine created inside the container. Everything is fully enclosed inside the Docker image. When I kind of close up, haven't touched anything on my local machine except maybe some image caching, which of course can be removed. You see, the first one is complete now, and it ended up saying ready for connection. And one should think that now this command list, as long as it's alive, Docker is running. No, I can close this one. Docker is running in the background. The only thing the command prompt is doing right now, it is conveniently checking the event logs. So if something happens out of this Docker image event log, I'll get it displayed here on screen. But that's for convenience only. I can basically close up this screen and start, just ignoring it. It will run in the background. But I also get a lot of nice info here. You see a container host name has been generated for me, so I can actually access this as it were a different machine. The NAV installation also put in an admin and a username. So let's try to see this. So I use the URL from the client here. Copy that one. And you see there's also a certificate file. It does self-signed certificates, so I'll get an error when I use a browser. But I could go to that certificate file and install it. I'm not going to spend time with that right now. So I put myself in here, go to the client. And see, now I'm actually connecting to this virtual host which sits inside the container. And I get the certificate problem. Okay, I'm in danger land. I'll continue. Admin, and I can go peek the name it generated for me. Roto 3780. Roto 3780. And thereby signing into the W1 version of NAV. And of course, I can do the same thing here by opening up yet another browser. Do the client over here. Go to the browser here. Paste that one in. And that's Viho 6887. See if I can remember that. Viho 6887. And by doing that, I actually have on my own machine now 2 concurrent instances of NAV running that has completely different language and everything. It could be different, could be NAV 2016, 17, cumulative updates and what have you, and I can see differences and changes and so forth. Let me just boot out this one. You can do other Docker commands. Let me just do a single one that is Docker stats with an S, and that will display the containers running. That's basically your how many quote virtual machines are running right now, or in this case, how many containers are running, and how much memory is used, and so forth. So you see, it's not like the virtual machines where I need to pre-allocate 4 or 8 or how many gigabytes of memory. This is kind of using the host operating system's memory dynamically, because I don't get my own memory allocator, so to speak. I do have means of limiting Docker images to only use a certain amount of memory, but this is way more lightweight than using these things. Right, that was Docker. Moving on to Vincent.
Thank you, Thomas. So Thomas talked to you a little bit about. Let's move back to the slides here. About cognitive services in Azure. So I want to show you very briefly also some other part of the AI and cognitive services which you might be familiar with, but maybe not in that form. So you're all familiar with translation and machine translation and Google Translate or Bing Translate. But if you go and use Bing Translate there, as I show on that slide, and try to translate the word item, for example, from English to French, you're going to get, what does it say? It says point, which, what does it mean? It means an item in the list, basically. So if you look at Dynamics 365 Tenerife, the word item actually means, the articles, the things you have in the ERP system. So that's not the correct translation. This is only on the bottom right. There's other possible translation. Actually, that's the third translation. That's the correct one. The word article in French that would be correct in the ERP context. And the reason why that doesn't written the right thing is because the translator here, the AI, doesn't have any context. But what you can do with Azure in Azure Services, you can use the big translator, which is the service behind this, and you can train it by fitting it some translation you have. So I've done that as an experiment. I took all the translation we have for Dynamics 365 and fit it to the service, and you deploy your own version of the AI and the machine translator, and you can call it through REST API and feed it with new translation, and it will return you something which is in the context of ERP and Dynamics 365. So and here's how it looks like. So I did a little bit of coding in our client. You see here that's the a regular deployment I have here, an on-prem deployment, and this is not something you'll see in the product at the top right, but there's a drop down, and you can change, for example, to let's say Italian. And what it does is that it takes all the strings which I'm displaying and fitting into the machine translation engine and translating the screen. Or I can do things like a little more exotic, like Japanese. So this is an example of how you can use AI, and that works. The whole NAV is actually. Damn, I said it. the whole Dynamics 365 is now currently translated, for example, in Japanese in this little prototype. So that was machine translation and another part of cognitive services. Now, Thomas, over to you for the next things on cognitive services.
Right. So let's move back to the slides.
Yeah.
You weren't done, Vincent.
Yeah, I know, but I'm trying to save a little bit of time. We're a little bit over time, so
there we go.
Let's skip some of the slides.
All right. The last thing I want to cover here is, again, cognitive services. The difference between machine learning and cognitive services is essentially when you start setting things into context. So you take this plus this would be easy if you only had those two. One thing, like Vincent was talking about machine translation, if you only do it word by word, you end up getting rubbish, right? If you start thinking about doing the context of the sentence and what does the sentence mean, and then you can start getting really nice machine translation out of this. So this is an experiment that's been done within Microsoft, and using the context and then doing image analysis and doing voice recognition. I'll have two examples of this, just showing it where this potentially could be going. And this will also come to ERP for sure, because having the context of all the big data in the cloud, wow! I mean, I can't imagine where this is going. So, how about a picture like this? This is a picture, you open your fridge, you take a picture, and immediately it recognizes, by the way, my refrigerator does not look as nice as this one, but anyways, it immediately recognizes what is in there. And then, of course, you can add the day of week, whether your teenage kids are on holiday or not, and then you could build the automatic shopping and grocery list by just taking a picture of your cabinets and your refrigerator. That's just one example of having image recognition together with cognitive services of knowing about what else goes on, and then adding 1 + 1 and getting 2. Another example is Microsoft actually spent some time working together with nobody else but McDonald's on this one. And there's a demo here, and I'm not even sure it's public, but I'm going to show it anyway. Where we have the scenario is the following. You are in the drive-through of a McDonald's, and they have a lot of errors. Because people order something, and when they pay, and then they get to the pickup, and then they at that point claim something is wrong. Now they paid, they have to have the things redone, blah blah blah. You can imagine that's the most costly point of getting the error, because couldn't you get it before and so forth? That would be nice. So we all humans, mistakes happens, and think about a sentence like, I would like two Happy Meals with coffee and with ketchup, please. I don't want ketchup in my coffee. How as humans we know that, but that's the cognitive services part, where you know that ketchup and coffee doesn't fit together, but ketchup would fit together with a Happy Meal and so forth. What they've done here is they put cognitive services, word recognition on a live system on this particular McDonald's restaurant, and have the machine build up the order as this guy is speaking, and he's changing his order. I would like 2 Happy Meals, blah, blah, blah. One of them with something, and now it needs to split. It's pretty amazing. What you'll see on screen when I start this is the order as the machine sees it in real time, and that's pretty cool. I need to get rid of Vincent's laser here.
welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order? Yes, I would like 2 Happy Meals, 1 cheeseburger and 1 chicken McNugget, both with fries and apples, 1 with a chocolate milk and 1 with a small orange juice. Also give me 2 cheeseburgers, both of those no onion and 1 of those no ketchup as well, 1 fry and a large coffee, 2 cream, 3 sugars. Would you like that fry to be large? Yes, thank you. Would you like barbecue sauce with those nuggets? No, sweet and sour. Is the order on your screen correct? Yes. Okay, your total is $14.68. Please pull around to the first window.
And this is done real time. You know, this to me is, you know, okay, well, I have a last picture that speaks to this. So another place we're seeing this, I just noticed this blog post about a month ago. The predictions we saw earlier, when we talked about prediction of the item forecast, the SQL Server team just made predictions available off the raw SQL Server. So you don't need to download the data out of SQL Server and ship it off to Azure Machine Learning. You can actually do it directly on the SQL Server by having predict being part of TXQL. I mean, this is very interesting. Another thing, how many seen this one? You know, to continue here, please click all the squares with cars or with signs or with I'm sorry, this isn't Danish, but whatever. What we are doing here, we as humans are doing training data. Like we said before with the amounts and the numbers and so forth, we click all these things and we are training the machine learning engine and they use us as validation, right? It tries to do it itself and use us as validation. You're welcome to the new world. You're contributing to Tesla or Volvo and whoever doing auto drive systems and so forth. And where's all this going? I have no idea. This is my favorite quote, this one, right? They tried to pull the plug, but it was too late. I think we are entering a fabulous time, a fabulous era. I believe our good old NAV product is getting a new name, but that product is going to be here for a long time. It's going to be equally fabulous. I'm a little bit worried about people from the UK. When you talk about artificial intelligence and do that search in the UK, you'll get this. And with that, on behalf of Vincent and I at Microsoft, I wish you a very nice conference.
Thank you.